Welcome everybody to the Fall Coordinating Council meeting. As you saw from our agenda, we're really focused today on the proposal review and 2022 funding discussions. The monthly committee updates have been going out, so we assume you guys have those. And with that, I will turn it over to our chair, John.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Getting through the sound checks and all the introductions. So the first order of business is consent on the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda or other business to add to it at this time?
Maya, can you please move down a slide?
No hands, Jeff?
No hands.
Okay, we'll take that as consent. And the other item is consent for approval of the proceedings from August 2021. Does anyone have any additions, changes, edits, or objections to approving the minutes? Please raise your hand.
So far, no hands.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Consider the proceedings approved. Next item is public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment? Please raise your hand and let staff call on you.
I see no hands.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So with that, I think we're ready to move into our business. Pass it back to you.
Outstanding. Maya, let's go one more slide down. All right, the meat of the matter. Of course, we've got the FY 2022 submitted proposals. Our Deputy Director, Julie Simpson, has been leading this through the Operations and Advisory Committee and will lead off with the majority of this presentation. So, Julie, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. Maya, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so these are the average rankings of the maintenance proposals. So it's the average of the operations and advisors scores. What you should note here, this is the same spreadsheet that you had in your materials, and what you'll note is that there are two proposals that fall to the bottom and are, beyond the expected funding in this particular spreadsheet. That's the PRFC electronic trip level reporting, and then also the expansion for the law enforcement application. Depending on whether we're in the 3.5 or 3.35 range, we do have somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 shortage in the maintenance proposals. Maya, if you can go to the next slide. So this is the average ranking for the new proposals. Again, we fall a little bit short, but just for one project, and that is for the New Jersey Shad DNA and Bycatch project. Since the Operations and Advisory Councils have met, there have been some changes behind the scenes, and I want to go over those with you on the next slide. Thanks, Maya. So the first one is that the ACCSP admin grant has been decreased by just a little over $70,000. We were able to do this because we're able to get some help desk support from some other funds. And so what this has enabled us to do with some savings elsewhere is to, without changing any of our service, decrease the admin grant by about $70,000. The other item that has changed is that the North Carolina electronic quota monitoring has been withdrawn from ACCSP funding. So that frees up another $63,854. Big kudos to North Carolina staff, because they really thought a little bit outside the box. They put their proposal in for the ACCSP funding, but they also put their proposal in through the FIS process. And their project got funded through that FIS project, and therefore they didn't need the ACCSP funding. So they were recognized in the Operations Committee and Advisory Committee meetings as really thinking ahead and trying to find the best way for us to reach all our coastal objectives when there is not as much money as we might need. And so that's another $63,000 that's back on the table, so to speak. A couple of other notes are on the right-hand side of the slide. The first is that the PRFC electronic reporting, you'll note that that was the next to last project in the maintenance on your spreadsheet when you got it. There was discussion at operations and advisors about the ranking and how this one fell to the bottom. The general consensus is that this is an absolutely worthy project. It is recognized that PRFC is pretty new to the process, and that the person who was putting the proposal together has only done that for this year. There were some places such as indirect funding that weren't in the proposal, and so it caused them to lose points and have a lower ranking, but that's just the result of, you know, the way that the proposal was put together, not so much the quality of the project. And so that was something that we thought was important from their discussion to bring forward and note to you all. The other item that we did want to note as part of that discussion is that the law enforcement application, as it went through that first year of its pilot, some of the things that were proposed changed a little bit. In particular, it doesn't actually collect data. And so folks felt that the expanding it was, because of the way it went through the pilot, that it was no longer really inside the scope of the ACCSP core mission and therefore the scope of the RFP. And so that one is actually ranked accordingly. And so what we've done on the next couple of slides is taken into account these 3 red arrows and made some adjustments to that. So Maya, if you can go to the next slide. So this is an updated version of the average ranking for the maintenance projects. And at the top, there's the yellow circle there. You can see the admin grant. That number has been decreased. And then at the bottom of the list, you can also see that we've removed the cost for the law enforcement application with the assumption that it was out of scope based on the previous discussions. And so what you can see here is that this now leaves us in a position where, depending on the exact level of funding, the PRFC grant will be funded potentially in full if there's the whole 3.5 million, which we can get to in a moment, but it is at least partially funded at the very lowest of levels. And Maya, if you can go one more slide. This is the change that we'll see in the updated average ranking for the new proposals. You'll see that we removed the North Carolina cost because that's being covered elsewhere. And so this actually does leave some money on the table that can be brought up above and used in the maintenance projects. And again, that number varies based on the level of funding. The next item that I want to address, Maya, if you can go forward, is the recommendations that came from the operations and advisory committees. For the maintenance proposals, the salient recommendation that they had here was that a project that's being funded on the port side, commercial sampling and bycatch for herring, mackerel, and menhaden. This has been a project that's been quite a long-term project. And one of the things that everyone discussed was that there's recognition that if this project isn't funded moving forward, that would put, that will put these species back on the biological matrix as a high priority. And now we would have to have discussions about, hey, do we then start funding this project again? And if we went through that process, that's going to result in data gaps when there's already a long-term data series. And so the recommendation is that the partners that are involved in the sampling for this project get together and discuss how we can move forward with this project in such a way that we can avoid those data gaps and moving the species back onto the biological matrix. For the new proposals, they recommended that if the North Carolina proposal was funded by FIS, which it was, then the remaining funds should be distributed to the new proposals first and then moved up to the maintenance proposals. That is the end of my presentation, so I will turn it back over to Jeff to go over the next slide.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie, for leading the group through the details of all the proposals, moving parts. Just as a note, these adjustments that have been made do reflect kind of an overall move to the core mission of the projects for ACCSP, and certainly staff and partner actions to balance available funding across kind of the admin grant and the partner projects. So I certainly appreciate everyone's activity to kind of direct their proposals and the options on the table as efficiently as possible. John, at this point, did you want to ask for questions on the spreadsheets and the rankings and the operations and advisors points, or would you like me to go to the next slide on the admin grant?
Yeah, Jeff, I think it would be good to see if questions, and I just want to say, thanks to the ops committee and the advisors for this. I've been there and done that, as many of us have, and know what a task that is, and really appreciate their efforts and how they do always look out for the intent of the program and try to make recommendations that are best for, data collection at the end of the day. And I think they just do a great job, and can't thank them enough for what they do to make our job a little bit easy. So with that said, just open up the floor and see if anybody has any questions on the recommendations or the matrix as it stands now.
Brandon, we have a hand up. Go ahead. And then followed by Richard Cody.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Just in regards to this, the top bullet here in regards to the maintenance proposals and on the portside commercial catch sampling, I'll follow up with council staff to talk through, the needs on Atlantic mackerel and the use of the sampling program here. But maybe I would just recommend that maybe not just talking through the states, but maybe including the federal partners in any of that discussion to see if we could, think through how we could fund and continue to do the sampling. Because I think obviously we need to have the states involved, but getting some of the federal partners like the council engaged in that discussion, I think would be beneficial.
Thank you, Brandon. We could certainly do that. And while the ops discuss this recommendation, if there's desire for ACCSP to participate in these calls or even organize and facilitate them, that's clearly something that we can do. And because this is specific to the herring, mackerel, and menhaden sampling, I do want to just remind folks that it was a highly ranked piece. It's in its last year of funding, and it is in the FY22 support at about the $26,000 rate. So Brandon has his hand down. John, you okay with me just running through the hands up?
Yes.
Okay. The next one I saw was Richard Cody. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is probably just more of a comment than anything else. But since most people realize the importance of the commercial catch sampling for herring and so on, but I think that it does raise a question of exceptions to the rules that were sort of put in place for maintenance versus new proposals, and I think that should be part of the discussions going forward as well. That what constitutes an exception, and then perhaps are there other mechanisms that could be used for partial funding or some way to keep the program alive, basically, so we don't have these data gaps, and maybe some kind of a risk analysis for the other surveys that are maintenance currently that possibly fall into this realm. So that's all.
Thank you, Richard. I think a lot of those brainstorming ideas would fall to the group as it goes. One thing I do want to point out is Maine has done a good job of covering the primary sampling in Maine, and the amount of funding that remains is really about going and sending Maine staff into other states to do the portside sampling. And there have been discussions and reports that other states were able to pick up some of that sampling when travel hasn't been allowed over the last few years. And so again, that's one of the items that that is probably in the mix for these discussions. The next hand I saw up was Lynn Fegley. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is sort of maybe philosophical and possibly rhetorical, but I want to say that I was a little bit discomfited by the idea that the PRFC proposal fell to the bottom because of a formatting issue. So I think the wording was, this is a great use of ACCSP tools. It satisfies, it's a very good project. They just didn't have an experienced proposal writer, which makes me wonder, if you have a really expert proposal writer who scores well, but the project is not as worthy. It makes me worry a little bit if maybe we need to see scores broken down. It just worried me a little bit that maybe, are we really ranking these proposals to, what is the most, important and valuable piece we need to fulfill. I don't know why that sort of bothered me a little bit, but it kind of did.
Thank you, Lynn. If you guys will allow me a moment, and I have Kathy's hand up and also Marty Gary. That language choice was mine, and it was the operations committee and our advisors committee discussions about was in-kind included in the proposal, and was the kind of the ranking sheet piece included in that part as well. And there was a lot of recognition from everyone on the operations committee, and Julie, if I miss something, please add in when I'm done, that they've all learned over the years how to kind of write the proposals and follow the format. And when they were new, they got guidance as well. And my goal in transparency in this language and putting this on screen for the coordinating council is to recognize exactly where the scores came out, a little bit of understanding about why that happened, if it hasn't already been shared by your operations committee members and advisors to you, and kind of help out with that. So that was the intent. And Kathy, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to go to Marty Gary next and come back to you. Marty?
Yep, thanks, Jeff and John, and thank you, Lynn, for weighing in, and thank you, Julie. Thanks all around. Julie, thanks for adding that narrative to that slide so folks have some semblance of, what PRFC is dealing with. And, the abridged version would be, we're tiny. There's only 5 of us. We don't have a full-time IT person, so we have a contractor who's brand new to us. Our previous contractor had worked with us since the early 90s, and we just went through a transition. So it's really, we're really working with a very limited capacity to put together these proposals. It's new to us. I'm trying to provide as much time and effort to help our contractor and stay engaged with us. We also understand there's a lot of great projects at play along the coast, and we all have to work together to give and support to make sure the greater good's accomplished. But we are coming out of the dark ages. PRFC has been paper only. We have a great baseline framework to work from. We have trip level daily reports submitted weekly as opposed to monthly for a lot of a lot of entities and jurisdictions. We have strong accountability in our process for accurate and timely reporting. So we think we are a great candidate to keep this going and get us out of the dark ages and into the light with electronic reporting. And to that end, we're going to do the very best we can with whatever funding we're afforded. But we don't really want to see anybody else be compromised. We want to work with everybody together. So I guess the end story here is we're doing the best we can with what we have. And we're going to continue to do that within the process. So I just appreciate both Julie and Lynn providing a little bit of clarity to our scenario. So thank you.
Thank you, Marty. And Julie, I gave you a hint of an opportunity to weigh in. Would you like to do so at this point?
Yeah, sure. I think, you covered a lot of it in the, there were just some items that do get points, like the in kind, you get the certain number of points for whatever percentage. And because that part was missing, it meant that they couldn't get those points. But I think one of the other things, to Lynn's point, is that there was great discussion that happened at the Ops and Advisors. And I think it also speaks to John's comment earlier of all the great work that they do, because they noted that, hey, this project fell to the bottom, but it was only because of some technical details that came out because of the way the ranking gives you points for, hey, you included all of the right aspects, so you get points for that, and hey, you have in kind and you get points for that. And a couple of those things were missing. So it was more of a technicality than a real result of what they felt was worthy. And that's why we wanted to make sure that discussion came forward from them. But they also similarly have discussions for things that maybe rank higher because of the technicality, because it's really well put together, but just aren't as worthy. So I think Lynn's right, those discussions do happen, and that's why it's really good to bring the discussion forward as well as just the math. And I will say that Blair, who is the IT contractor, did speak up and ask for advice and was offered a number of helpful points for next year. So from a process standpoint, it was also a great discussion.
Thank you, Julie. Let's go. We have 3 hands up. Let's go back to Kathy, and then we have Dee Lupton and Renee Zobel after that. So Kathy, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. 2 points. One that's popped up in the most recent discussion, to Lynn's point. There, in the ranking process, I just wanted to add this, there a lot of the points derived from a broad range of points that are available for which ACCSP module the project falls within, and operations and advisors have a lot of discretion for how many points are awarded in that section. And so I understand your concern, Lynn, but I feel confident that the ranking and the matrix that's been developed, just because a project can tick off the bullet points for certain components that might give it points, there's a lot of points that are in that module section as well. And the operations and advisor member knows that just because something's in there doesn't mean they have to actually give it that point if there's a problem with that component. So I think I understand why you were concerned, but I know from my years of doing this that those kind of concerns can be addressed through the ranking process. So I hope that was okay to add. And then with the comment on the portside commercial cap sampling, to Richard's point about an exception, I hope that part of the discussion goes back to ops and advisors, because, and it's something for the coordinating council to think about, because that's exactly the kind of thing that originally, I'm not picking at your point, Richard, but it's the exact kind of thing that we set up the phase out to avoid is for there to be exceptions. However, there's going to be probably one-offs that, because of the nature of the project, like this one, in terms of the need for the data, not only is it long-term, but for the stock assessments, that it might have to result in some sort of other option. So I just think that was really interesting. It's not something I had thought about in years of doing this, that a data gap for a specific species could make it pop back on as a priority in the biological matrix. And the same could be true for the bycatch matrix with, if there's a data gap based on a gear type. And so I think that's something that's never occurred to me before. I appreciate you all making the point, and it's something that I'd like to just encourage the coordinating council members to think about and keep this at the forefront of our minds as we move forward, because we're on the very cusp of being able to, you know, have all the projects that were funded for 15, 20, 25 years phase out. So I think this is going to be very interesting moving forward, and I really appreciate that you guys made that point for us so clearly. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate those points. Next person I had was Dee. Dee, take away.
So good morning. I have to point out an observation I have about the Potomac River project. It has nothing to do with its project, but we allowed an extension of the step down process from 5 years to 6 years due to COVID. I think 3 projects had resubmitted, and they're all above the Potomac River. So, you know, and this group made that decision to allow that extension. And I think that actually hurt Potomac River during this process. Regardless of the ranking criteria, 3 of those projects that probably should not have had a project in here this year, if they weren't here, may have made up the money for Potomac River. I just have to point that out as an observation. And some of those projects have been on here since 2000 and 2001. So just an observation that when I was reviewing these, I was like, well, this is what I thought may happen in my own mind that would have occurred. I don't have a solution here because they're, you know, they're all, we made those decisions. So I, you know, we'll abide by those decisions to allow that extension. I do believe if we go down the process of allowing exceptions, it will have to be vetted out very clearly what is an exception. I've recognized actually for this project that it is, you know, if we take them off, and I think there's been other species that if we took them off the didn't fund the items, that the biological rankings would come up higher. I think some of the snapper grouper aging work was in that same boat as that. So, you know, other projects, you know, whether it's a catch and effort program, you know, if they don't get ACCSP money, we have data gaps. So, you know, the ACCSP has always been dealing with that issue. But if we, I have no problem researching and discussing thoroughly exceptions, but, you know, I also see that the step down was to allow for people to wean off the money and continue to fill those data gaps and seek other funding sources. And I think you have an example here where when there are basically an exception, which we had for the 6 year, that one project that's a good project may not get all its funding. So that's just some points I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Dee, thank you for raising that. The last hand we have up at the moment is Renee. And Renee, when you're done, John, I'm going to ask you to kind of summarize and take the next direction.
Thank you, Jeff. Kathy kind of took a point right out of my mouth with that first point. Also, as a long-term ops member, Lynn, I understand your reservation, but the process when there is a lot that goes into that ranking process, and it is easy to discern something that is just not properly prepared, but has good merit. And there is, you know, the bulk of the points are in that module. And that is an area where there's a lot of discretion on each member, and that's where the primary point scoring happens. My second question, and I think I heard Marty address this, but if the PRFC project wasn't funded completely, I'm assuming, but I wanted to ask the question, could they be partially funded, Marty? And could you guys still make good use of those funds?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. I did talk to Blair, our contractor, who's on the ops committee, and he was in attendance. As Julie noted, he participated in the discussion. And the original two scenarios, I asked him, we sat down and we tried to characterize what we would be able to achieve under the first scenario. And Julie, you might have to help me because I'm kind of getting confused with, what was presented today versus the original two options coming out of the ops committee. But the first scenario, the higher level of funding, we agreed that we could make some tangible progress. The second tier of lower funding, it's like we're treading water, for lack of a better term. We could continue the program, but it would be questionable how much progress we would be able to make. That's probably, unfortunately, the best way I can answer that.
Marty, this is Jeff. I appreciate that. And just there have been a lot of moving parts here. Maya, can you go up 2 slides, please? Perfect. So with the change to the admin grant, and this is kind of the updated ranking of maintenance proposals, I wanted to at least take a moment. The columns to the right on 3.5 versus 3.35 funding scenarios are the two kind of lower and upper and lower bounds that we've historically dealt with, and usually we fall somewhere in the middle. So this is probably a good time to say, if we're similar funding to last year, I'm expecting that we'll be in that 4.3, 4.5 range, which would, in this case, take care of almost all of the PRFC proposal. So if that works out, the maintenance funding and the admin approach look like it will support the next year of PRFC at nearly the full requested amount, which is $215,000. And with that, John, do you want to?
Sure, Jeff, thank you. And I appreciate you pointing that out. I think it's been good discussion. We've certainly helped clarify the record and the process here some. Even raised some other points about the potential consequences of decisions such as extending the maintenance another year, which aren't always thought about. So thanks to the members who raised all of these issues. And I would say it sounds like there's a lot of support here for funding the PRFC project. And as Jeff pointed out, if we get funding along the lines of what we received last year, then it seems that the entire project can be funded. If we get the lower bound of funding, it's going to be about 100K short. And I guess if that's what happens once we see the funding, perhaps, I think PRFC considers what they can do with that, and we consider what other developments happen. As seems to be the case in many years, we get a project that's on the bubble, and quite often we're able to get it close enough to where they can move forward and make progress. So I think that sort of sums up where I see it right now. We do have the big unknown of the funding that we're going to actually get, but it does sound like everyone supports funding that, and I didn't hear any objection to dropping the law enforcement app from consideration. So I think that sort of where we're left with either PRFC being fully funded to being potentially 100K short at the lowest funding level.
Thank you, John. I don't have any more hands at the moment, so I'll pause before I just jump forward to the admin proposal slide. I still see no hands. So Maya, can you go forward? I think it's 3 slides, but the ACCSP admin proposal. One more. Perfect. Thank you so much. So at this point, I'll provide a little bit more information about the admin proposal for next year. As we already covered, we reduced about 70,000 off of this for taking away Safest Help Desk support specifically. This proposal does add in 1 software staff member and reduces some contractor support for development of mobile applications as we begin to kind of onboard that process. This software staff member was put into the proposal and discussed last year and chosen to delay that decision for a year. As we developed this proposal, I did speak with John and Jay and the leadership team to keep that in for and see where things ended up at this meeting and after the proposal rankings. And the real benefits to bringing on the additional software staff member is more timely development of the ACCSP priorities, including the electronic dealer reporting redesign. So one of our great successes in the last 2 years, really, but this last year has been the eTrips mobile and online and upload redesign. And that aligns the processing of the data, adds a whole lot of flexibility, and really makes the data quality flowing through the whole system at a very consistent level. And when there have been changes or adjustments requested by partners, because of all that extra time and effort that went into the setup, some of those occur amazingly quickly. It's been really impressive to watch staff and partners work through some of those issues and be like, oh, well, because of the setup, we'll just change this and this and this. And, you know, in a matter of hours, you know, the request has been met. So that's where we want to go with more of the software design on the dealer reporting side. That's where we recognize need for registration tracking type things, which are in the action plan. So a little foreshadowing for tomorrow's meeting, business meeting. But that's why the software staff is in there. And because it's been such a point of discussion for the coordinating council on staff growth, the needs, and the trade-offs between ACCSP staff testing software and partner staff testing software. Sometimes partner staff just don't have the time to do that testing in all the variety of ways where the user account, the permits, the questions that show up on the screen are really fully tested and vetted. And so adding that in as a staff position and functionality really kind of brings in-house a bit more capability. And that ultimately is to keep up with the list of changes that are useful and requested by regulations and partners to move forward. So that's in the materials as a supporting document to the admin proposal. But I want to make sure, again, with transparency, we cover that in terms of the future outlook. We have been reviewing and looking at the very valid, discussion points before of, is this a continual uptick in ACCSP staff size, and the stable staffing levels is the point to say, nope, this looks like it's going to be where we want to be for quite some time. And it maintains the support of integrated coastal data collection, working with the federal and the state partners to align things through the one-stop reporting approach, as well as additional regulatory needs. I want to again call out thanks to North Carolina, but also point out ACCSP has 2 projects funded by FIS for the attribute validation, so kind of the at entry checks to make sure that the data are clean and valid in terms of the codes that are going in, as well as support for FSMA. So some approaches that are required for our data connections with our federal partners and have certainly had good benefits for both the federal partners and our data sharing as things move forward. So try to avoid the too techie in the weeds summary here, but that is those are some of the perspectives that we're considering as we presented the admin proposal for this year. So pause there and ask John and others if you have questions for us. I see a first hand from Kathy Knowlton. So Kathy, go ahead.
Hey, hello again. Having been with this group for a really long time, I've never been a huge supporter, I guess, of seeing the admin budget go up in terms of growth. This is actually going to end up being a positive comment, Jeff, don't worry. I've always had caution. You know, I've always been in a crew that views this with caution. I think there are appropriate discussions when you have an admin budget that's 2.2 million of an expected, maximum 3.5. But I appreciate the flexibility last year to delay bringing in this new software staff position. But I think when it comes to expanding the software ability and reducing our reliance on contractors, if we want the program to keep growing, then we have to add this position. And if we want the program not to be able to continue to grow, that could be a decision that we, make, or if we have a budgetary crisis in the future, that's always a possibility. But in order, there's 23 partners in ACCSP, and the majority of them are working on either catch effort modules or biological modules that are actively utilizing the data support team weekly, monthly, annually. There's projects like the citizen science program that's got is developing a customizable app for our partners to use. And I think we just have to take a minute to remember all of the work that is done by the software development team. Helps us not only fulfill our regulatory obligations in terms of our partnerships with our federal partners, but it allows the state partners. I can speak from experience. We have IT with Georgia DNR in Atlanta, but we don't have it locally. And some of the only ways we're able to get this work done is in our partnership through ACCSP. So though I am not a huge fan of seeing the admin budget grow, I think this was an appropriate decision. And I just wanted to speak in support of that. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. The other hand I have up is Bob Peel. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, and just to sort of follow along Kathy's comments, if I might, I think I understand why we're adding adding the new software staff, and I get it, and for all the reasons that Kathy mentioned. But I think in the presentation today, in Julie's slides, it says the admin grant was going down $70,000, and I think it's important to note that it went down $70,000 from the original ask of this year. But when you compare the admin grant that's proposed for 22, Jeff, is it up about 150,000 or so from FY21, the current year?
In terms of what was actually funded last year, yes, that would be true. The number on screen, the 2.2 million, is actually very similar to what was originally requested last year. And then there was a lot of, give and take last year to reduce the admin grant.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So, I think this is an obvious statement, but the more that goes into the admin grant, the more we're going to have conversations similar to what we had with PRFC. And I'm not saying I don't support the growth on staff. I know they're doing a lot of work. They're all busy. They're all flat out. I see them every day, cranking things away. So it's just, it just needs to be a very conscious decision, I think, of the coordinating council of trade-offs between partner project funding and staff funding, and we need to be very deliberate about, is this the right balance between the two? And, it is good to see what that Jeff, has on the slide here about future outlook, that if we were to hire this new software person, we can probably, stay stable at that level of funding for some time in the future, as he was saying. I think, and as Kathy said, reducing the reliance on contractors is great. It's not, the way it's proposed right now, it's not a one-to-one ratio of, we didn't spend $1 on software person and saved $1 on contractor. We're spending a little bit more this year than we are on contracts, than we are reducing our contract support. So hopefully in the out years, we can balance that out a little bit more. And as the new staffer gets up to speed, we can even reduce contractor support even further and make up the difference, is what I'm hopeful for. So again, just sort of piling on it, it is a tough balance. It's a zero-sum game where, ACCSP has been fixed for a really long time, probably too long of a time, with the in between 3.5 and 3.35. And maybe that's really what we all need to work on, is figuring a way to try to get some more money in just data collection projects coast-wide, so we can cover what the partners need to do as well as what staff needs to happen. So just want to make those comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. We have 2 more hands up. The next is Pat Kelleher, and then back to Kathy Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question to you, Jeff, on timing of the new staff, bringing them on. Just wondering if there is some logic in just waiting to see where the final number comes in before that staff person is brought on, seeing what those numbers look like. I'm sensitive to the needs of PRFC, considering the size of their shop, the fact that this would be a major game changer for them if we can find a way to fund them in their project. I'm just wondering if there's a way to balance this out a little bit. And I say that, I don't want it to sound like I'm not supporting the need for new staff. Those issues are real. The future outlook, I appreciate how you've laid that out. The one thing that's kind of the big question mark that's not on the future outlook is going to be lobster tracking, if ACCSP is going to have a big role with that data storage, and how that's going to impact numbers and admin costs going into the future. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble, Mr. Chairman, but I'm just wondering if there is a balanced approach here that we could think about, so we can find a way to resolve this issue of funding for PRFC.
Thank you, Pat. I would rather call on John a little bit here, but I'm certainly supportive of when those numbers come through, working with the leadership team on what those timelines are. When it felt lengthy to include the entire action plan in the ACCSP meeting here, when that will be handled under the business meeting. But really, it's the big point that you're all making about priorities of what do we get done as a group in the action plan versus what do we wait on. And the hiring process takes at least 3 months, and so we're right now backfilling a couple of open positions, and the point's well taken of making sure the partner projects get funded here and balancing out the timing of the staff position with the leadership team once we know more about the congressional process. But John, did you want to add to that?
Sure, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity, and I think that many of us share the sentiments echoed by Kathy and Bob, looking at the grant and the long-term outlook and balance for the admin versus projects is certainly an important topic, and we all know how much ACCSP has come to be relied upon for so many things, and the reach has expanded and the scope of data has expanded, and that's certainly going to continue. And I do wonder if there isn't an option, Jeff, to potentially just tap the brakes a little bit on filling the position until we do see how much money actually comes through. That seems like a pretty, easy to accomplish compromise that may not have a whole lot of negative impacts as far as this staff person. And am I wrong on that, or do you see something that that makes sense? And when do we think we know? I'm trying to remember when we find out. I guess it's all tied on the federal budget process, so none of us have a crystal ball for that thing.
Given the current continuing resolution and what Congress may or may not do, I have no idea when they're going to get done. So I would lean on Bob or somebody else to answer that. The big delaying by a few months and keeping with the idea that it's good to add this person sometime in FY22, I think I can work with the leadership team and move that way. I would be concerned about saying let's delay it an entire year during this meeting without taking some pretty significant items off of the action plan. In the ability to do the work during 2022 so that we can put updated software out in the field in early 2023. The alignment of when the work gets done and when it can be tested and when it can be released in the fishing year means that the actual time to develop, the time to learn is actually pretty far offset from the time to put it in the field in a way that supports all the partners in data collection, the paper forms, the different data flow systems, and the fishermen getting used to it. So I know I took a tangent there, but certainly open to those discussions. And so, John, do you want to reply, or do you want to call on Kathy, who is our last hand up at the moment?
I think maybe I guess the current continuing resolution goes till December, if memory serves. Maybe we can sit on it till then and perhaps invoke the leadership team at that time to decide whether say, go ahead into January and do this, or, do we want to try to find some other way to fund the PRFC project? Because I think that's the bottom line that everyone's sort of looking at achieving, is just getting that project funded. So with that, maybe Kathy has an idea.
Oh, I don't know that I have an idea. I just have a perspective that when we look at the development of this program over the last 20 years, when we started out and we had ACCSP staff, down around the 7 to 9 person in terms of what they were covering, and then leaping forward about 20 years, I don't think any of us could have foreseen the reliance upon software development and the success that has been seen with having reporting tools that have significantly reduced the burden on our constituents in terms of lowering the number of times they're reporting to multiple entities, whether they be multiple states or states and federal. And some of the growth in the admin proposal, I feel the need to remind everybody was because we took on the APHIS, statewide conduct of APHIS. And I'm by no means advocating that stop. I think we've seen a huge advancement in that program, and that was due partially, or if not mostly, to the states working through ACCSP for the electronic tablet data collection and the leaps that we've seen in the potential for increased timeliness and QC happening and reduction of recall bias for being able to correct mistakes after the fact. And so I think the way we need to brace this, and plus the added transparency that Jeff has been providing the last 2 years on exactly what those increases are and are not for. I really appreciate that the time is being taken to have this discussion at the coordinating council level, and it's very clear what is being requested. And I think the model has changed in the last 20 years. We started off with most of our partners unable to collect 100% catch effort in the commercial sector. And we've had to work through developing that. And yes, if you look at the FY22 proposal rankings, you see that the majority of the proposals that are on their last 5th/6th year of continued maintenance funding, most of them are not asking for a lot of money to continue. The mandatory dealer reporting, Maine, Rhode Island, the herring, most of those are well on their way to going down. So I think it is a conversation that needs to continue at the executive leadership level, because it's basically a new model, and we've got this. It is a behemoth of an admin proposal, but I almost think that the term admin isn't even appropriate anymore, because it's really admin and operations. It's not just administering the program. It's the admin budget is the heart of being able to maintain the data warehouse and new developments for partners through software development. And so I think the place where this needs to pivot is the amount of money. And I hope that in no way, Bob, you take that as me pushing back against your comments, because I agree with not growing the admin budget, that it's very difficult to be able to balance the needs of partners coming in with new proposals. Obviously, we made that step down process, hoping that we were assuring the possibility for more money to go to the new proposals, and to have that ingenuity and entrepreneurship from the partners that ACCSP so needs, and it was designed to promote. But I think this is a new sort of, the last 3 or so years in terms of having to grow that portion of the staff is a reflection of a very large development in the program itself. And as difficult as it is to have this limitation on funding that will impact new funds, and I understand, I'm well aware that the situation in Maine with 100% lobster reporting is a huge issue hanging over us, and trying to deal with how much support we can get from ACCSP. But understanding all those things, I just wanted to kind of wrap this up and say that it's sort of a new model that I think we're approaching. So thank you. Hope I didn't make anybody mad with that, by the way.
I don't think so, Kathy. I think those are, good points, and I think you're right. It is a lot more than what admin was traditionally. It is admin and operations, and there's a lot being done, and there's a lot of value to that. And perhaps the leadership team can get together next year and think about some of those points about where does this admin budget go in the future, and what does that mean for funding, and how do we try to find some way to get the message out there that the funding probably does need to increase to match the much expanded mission that ACCSP is pursuing at this point. So Jeff, any more hands?
We do have one from Bob and Kathy. I certainly appreciate all of the points you made. I do want to point out two things in response to one of Kathy's with the staff size and the increase relative to taking on MREP. The MREP staff are funded out of not the admin grant, so we do have 3 staff that are part of ACCSP but not included in the admin grant, because that is covered by bringing on MREP. And the other is the lobster reporting, whether that's the VMS and location tracking or the harvester reporting. There are partner projects that have been funded to continue to support that. And once the systems are in place, the number of data records going through is not expected to be an extra large task on the ACCSP staff. And so at least pointing those two things out, I do want to make sure I call on Bob. So Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. No, Kathy, you definitely didn't make me angry at all. I agree with you. The model has changed, where the 23 partners rely on ACCSP staff for day-to-day activities and long-term programming activities and everything else. So I agree 100% with what you said. And I think my point was just that we need to be conscious about that transition of the model from just, like we're calling it, the old admin model to admin and operations. I think that needs to just be made consciously, and the partners need to be aware that reliance on that staff is great and 100% appropriate, but we just need to be aware. It means there's going to be less money available for partner projects. And if things aren't funded, we need to recognize the reason why they weren't funded, which is, we're putting an investment into the staff, which is the group that we're all relying on to keep things moving along more than we used to. And that's, that's fine. Programs transition over, it's been 20 years, so it should be a very different animal than it was 20 years ago. So I think I don't disagree with anything you said at all, Kathy.
Thank you, Bob. John, I don't want to force things, but Maya, could you move forward one slide? We've
yeah, Jeff, I think it's time for that and see where we stand.
Okay, then, John, there you are.
So we've had great discussion. I think we have good guidance for going forward. And at this point, we normally would get a motion to clarify the intent of the group with regard to the proposals and the rankings and where we go, approving the admin grant, and then what's available for projects and funding in the order of those. So open it up and see if someone is willing to make a motion.
Hand up from Jason McNamee.
You ready for me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. And just for the record, Kathy, I'm not mad at you either. I thought what you said was great. Okay, here's a motion. Move to support the updated ACCSP admin proposal, the top 7 maintenance proposals, and the remaining 3 new proposals as ranked by the operations and advisory committees. The ACCSP leadership team will be engaged to adjust to the actual funding levels when known.
Thank you, Jason. We have a hand up from Lynn Fegley. Go ahead, Lynn.
I was going to offer a second.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, I guess, Jeff, the easiest way to probably do it is just see if there's any objection to the motion. Raise your hand.
Sounds good. I'm looking for hands. I see no hands. We'll wait another 10 seconds or so.
Yeah, I'll say if no hands come up, then the motion is approved. And then I think, Jeff, just a clarification, if we were to continue on a level funded situation, the funding for this year, was that at the 3.4 range?
Yes. I'd probably have to go back and check my math, but my memory at the moment says we were in that 3.4.
Right. So if we are continuing resolution for the year and level funded, then we can fully cover the PRFC project.
That is my expectation, yeah.
Thanks. No hands, so motion approved.
Well, we now have 2 hands up for discussion. So first was Jason McNamee and second would be Bob Beal. Jason? Oops.
Yeah, sorry, mine is not an objection, just I'm not objecting to the motion that I made, but just a clarification. So in the text, and it may have been me not saying this, but the text should say after the second comma and the remaining 3 new proposals. The word new is missing. Thanks.
Bob?
Thanks, Jeff. Just to be clear, is the expectation that with John's recent comment that at 3.4 PRFC is fully funded, does that mean the coordinating council is comfortable with starting the hiring process for the software staff member, or does everyone still want to hold off on that until maybe we get the next round of information from Congress after the continuing resolution is addressed? I'm fine either way. I just want to make sure staff, or Jeff, you have the direction you need from the group.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Comments or response to Bob?
Yeah, Jeff, I'm trying to think about that and reflect on the timing. So it did, you said it takes about 3 months to get it done. So it could be in getting someone hired, which makes sense. If we were to wait and see what happens after the current continuing resolution expires in December, that potentially puts this back 3 months. And that might be something the group supports. I'm not sure.
The admin grant starts as of March 1, 2022, is the normal cycle for that. My best case would not be to announce this position today. It would be to wait until January. And so I think we do have time to see what happens with the continuing resolution and at least see where we're at in December and meet with the leadership.
Thanks, Jeff. I think that achieves it. Then that gives us a chance to see what happens from Congress in December before you put this into motion.
And we have another hand up from Kathy Knowlton. Kathy.
Just that I agree with that. That plan sounds very judicious, but also still having the opening as a possibility for the latter half of the fiscal year. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Mr. Chair, we had no objections to the motion, but haven't captured status of the motion.
Yep, so I think the motion stands approved and agreement to, as you said, you wouldn't advertise this till January anyway, so we do have a chance to see where the next funding decision takes us. And allow the leadership team, as it says, to deal with that and keep the group informed and try to best achieve the intent of the coordinating council, working with you and Julie.
Maya, can you go forward one more slide? Let's switch back to the presentation and go forward one slide. So we are near the end of our primary business. Thanks everybody for your discussion and for your support of ACCSP, the process, the partnerships, and the group activities. I did want to note once again that the action plan, ACCSP is listed primarily under goal 3, and that review is going to be up for tomorrow's business meeting. Wanted to give you guys a chance. We have until 12:30 if there are questions. I see a hand up from Marty Gary. So if you have questions or thoughts that you want to ask or things that you'd like us to follow up on, either during the meeting or after, now is an opportunity to do so. But thank you for your participation today. And with that, let me jump over to Marty.
Thanks, Jeff. And Mr. Chair, not a question, but I just wanted to express my deepest gratitude to all the members of the coordinating council. to the chairman of our commission, Pat, for your comments, and to all the staff, Bob, Julie, everyone, Jeff, yourself, for working with us to try to put PRFC in a position to succeed, as we go into this second year. I'm humbled by the amount of attention you provided to us and deeply appreciative. So thank you all.
All right, Mr. Chair, I see no other hands. So thank you for leading us through this meeting. It is yours to call the question.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. If no more comments, I think I'll adjourn the meeting and echo what Marty said. This is a great group to work with, and it is always encouraging how well everyone tries to do the best for the program. With that, we stand adjourned.